Well, here I am with Kashif Khan from KashifKhanOfficial.com. We're talking all about genetic mind mapping and finding your superpower. Kashif, how did you get into this? How did you get into functional genomics and really understanding how genes impact our behavior, our mood, really everything, every element of our health?
So it wasn't your typical path, right? My path into it was actually from being ill myself, and I think a lot of great functional medicine stories have the same story. Somebody was struggling, couldn't get a solution, made their own solution, and now wants the world to know. And that was sort of me. I had a lot of inflammatory issues like eczema, migraines, etc. I had autoimmunity, psoriasis, all sorts of stuff all at once, and it didn't add up. Like, where did all this come from? I'd never been sick, and then all of a sudden, everything, right? First time I ever needed medical intervention, didn't give me what I wanted in terms of like the why behind what I was feeling. And so I started to dig, and including genetics, and that's where I learned that there seemed to be some answers, but even that wasn't so clear. And so I dug in and kind of built my own interpretation around what these genes actually mean, including what you suggested around mind. The things that we talk about weren't really taught academically, so we had kind of had to build them.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And so, what did you learn about your own genetics? Like, as you were learning this, what did you figure out that you were able to biohack in your own health?
So if we start with the mind, um, the thing that hit me was, there's this belief that there's opinion, that there's right and wrong. And what I didn't know is that we each see the world through a unique lens that our neurochemicals create. And the genes determine how you process those neurochemicals, how you bind them, how you make them, how you clear them, the duration of the intensity of the moment. And so that was one of the things that actually made me very sick. Um, there's a neurochemical called dopamine, which allows you to experience pleasure, but also reward. So both sources of satisfaction, ultimately. And whether you're achieving pleasure or reward, your brain doesn't necessarily need both, but either will give it to you. And the way your body processes it, there's a bit of an anticipation. And so the dopamine gets released, and there's receptors in your brain that start to activate to bind that dopamine in order for you to have that euphoria in the moment. Then there's breakdown and clearance and removal, which determines how long did that experience last. So there's proteins that get it out of the receptors. And if you look at my genetics, I have the lowest possible density of receptors. The DRD2 gene determines that. So I have the worst version of the DRD2 gene. So the intensity level for me is way down here. And I have the best possible version of the clearance gene. So it's really fast. So the way I experience the world is I can't get no satisfaction, right? It's like it's felt way down here and it's gone way too fast. So at the time I got sick, I didn't know I was living in burnout and my nervous system was completely overwhelmed and fried because my brain was so able to say yes and seek more because I just couldn't get satisfaction. But my body was no different than anybody else's and it couldn't keep up, right? So what I perceived as a normal volume of stress, what I perceived as a normal volume of work, I was running 10 companies,
Wow.
right? Literally, I had 10 different companies that I was building and running. Two of them were doing really well, six were completely failing, and two of them were kind of junior and developing, right? But I didn't care. It's like warrior spirit. So that's when I learned that structure and understanding what is actually required is the guardrails I need to not slowly kill myself, right?
Mm.
There's also supplements to upregulate certain pathways. There's also nutrition and teas. And once you understand the lens you see through and how is it serving you or not serving you, then you can decide how to intervene. And now I don't have that burnout anymore, which was one of the major things that was sort of slowly chipping away at my biological age.
Yeah, and that's because it takes a lot of stimuli to produce the amount of dopamine you need to kind of feel like a win, right? To
Yeah.
feel pleasure, and then you're clearing it out quickly. So it's like once you get enough stimulus to get that win, it's gone pretty
God.
quickly.
Yeah.
And
And
so
it's like what
you're just working to get that next hit.
it was always the what's next syndrome, right? Every shiny object was exciting. And that's why not do really well in one business instead of run 10 different ones? Because I couldn't say no to the opportunity.
Mm,
But what I've learned, and now here's what we teach people. How do you take that kryptonite, that crippling kryptonite, and turn it into your superpower,
right.
right? And I've learned that there's equal satisfaction in saying no to a distraction as there is in saying yes to an opportunity if it is aligned with the outcome. So what I've learned is the person like me who has the low dopamine brain really prioritizes by outcome. Show me the shiny object and I'll find my way to get there. The person with the high dopamine brain with the higher intensity and slower clearance prioritizes by process. Give me an instruction and give me a deadline. The outcome isn't such a big deal. I just need to know what to do and when to do it by. And if you understand the nuances of how your brain works and what drives you, you can start to structure things to get the outcome you want, as opposed to pigeonholing yourself into a structure that doesn't work.
Yeah, that's good. Now, what you mentioned the DRD2 gene. What are some of the key ones? Obviously, it's a dopamine receptor gene. What are some of the key genes you're looking at there as you're mapping out somebody's superpower?
So the pathways you would look at, and I'll talk about the genes, are the dopamine pathway, so reward seeking, adrenaline, so let's call it emotional impact and emotional intelligence. We look at serotonin, so mood regulation and propensity towards detail, so the brain's ability to filter, and then brain-derived neurotropic factors, so neuroplasticity. And you can take all these pieces and understand what each piece does. Then you can play this game of moving the pieces around and understanding what profile you've created, right? And it sounds complicated, but once you learn the pieces, it is so simple and elegant that you can really, if I have someone's DNA, I can describe their personality to a T without ever talking to them. And it's like a tarot card reading, like, how did you know that, right? Because the neurochemicals don't lie. So let me give you an example. There was a project we were working on. So why I know what I know is because once I healed myself, and then my mom and my niece, I built a research project. So I hired a couple of MDs, a couple of PhDs. They literally sat at my dining room table because I didn't even know why I was doing it. And we started to map out, which now is referred to as functional genomics. So taking genetics, just like medicine is diagnosed and prescribed, and functional medicine is why. Why did you get sick? Root cause. The same thing was happening with genetics. Genes were bucketed into a very disease-centric, this is causing this is causing that, not the functional, how do these genes equal eventually disease? What do I do about it, right? So that's the science we created, functional genomics. And that only happened because I sat in front of people and clinically interacted with them to figure out not only the sick people, but also the healthy people. Why didn't you get sick? You have all the genes that point to all these problems. What did you do right? So we need to learn both, right? So I spent 3 years, 7,000 people, one by one, understanding their profiles and what drove them to the outcomes, right? Now we can reverse engineer and teach that. So in that time, one of the projects we did was with the US military. There's a group called the Liminal Collective that was contracted by the Navy SEALs to just optimize them, biohack them, right? And one thing they were stuck on was, we don't understand trauma. We don't understand PTSD. It doesn't make sense. Same training, same everything. Why different variable outcome? And so we said, of course, genetically they're not the same person. How can you expect the same outcome? So we were contracted to do this work. And here's what I showed them. Is that when you deploy someone into active combat and they're in that intense moment of stimulus, it's an adrenaline rush, right? Pulling the trigger, seeing the bomb going off, the adrenaline pumping in the chest, we know that feeling, right? And the genetics of adrenaline are driven by the ADRA2B pathway, which determines the regulation or volume of adrenaline causing the upregulation in your biology. So adrenaline makes you bigger, stronger, faster, right? Superhuman temporarily to give you what you need in that moment. But adrenaline does a second thing. Because that moment is so impactful, and because your body doesn't know that it's the year 2026, your body still thinks you're a cave person, your adrenaline pathway convinces your brain something's trying to kill me, something's trying to eat me. So I want to remember everything to avoid this mistake again. So it starts to imprint information. And when somebody has the dysregulated versions of the adrenaline genes, they not only imprint the intellectual information, they also imprint the emotional information. So some people are genetically wired to remember what things feel like, and some people aren't. And so they actually imprint, and now when they're reminded of that sound, smell, face, they feel it like it's happening again, a continuation, right? But that was half of the story, because when I looked at the genomic profile of these soldiers, the ones that only had this still didn't really experience trauma. Yes, there was a recall, but it wasn't debilitating. The ones for whom it was debilitating, there's a second layer. And this is what I mean by functional. Not this gene is this gene, but putting the pathways together into a profile, right?
Yeah.
The other half was BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. The lack of neuroplasticity because they had a suboptimal version of this gene. So neuroplasticity is whenever I'm learning something, accepting something, believing something, I need new neurons in my brain to process that new information, to accept and give myself the physical real estate to know that information, right? There's like a unique place in your brain where you know whatever you know. So when you have slow neuroplasticity because of a slow version of this gene, that same exact experience, you may experience what we call a shell shock, which is this is a big deal. Slowly processing as opposed to moving on, right? So now when we saw that combination of I have the adrenaline dysregulation, so I remember what things feel like, but I also have the BDNF dysregulation, so I give that thing more weight and meaning than it deserves because it took longer for me to process, so there's a shell shock. That combination was a soldier that says, I can't do this anymore. That was the one that when they were reminded, they're just completely nervous system broken, can't do it anymore. So now what is the answer? Is it that this person should never have been deployed? That's one potential answer. You are wired to be the researcher, the scientist, because you think deep. You have emotional intelligence, you work with purpose. That was your wiring, your superpower, right? Or we know the exact tools that upregulate your BDNF and slow the adrenaline genetics down. So you have two choices. You've now identified the profile, step one. Who am I? Right? I am this unique profile. This is how I see the world. And this is how I'm going to react. Now I have to decide, is this serving me for my purpose? Great. Or is it identifying my purpose? Let me go do that. Or is it, I don't have a choice. I have to do this regardless. And I'm not designed for it. Now let me add the nutrients that upregulate those genes to give me what I needed. That's how to use genetics functionally, as opposed to this gene means you have 80% of Alzheimer's, good luck, right?
Yeah.
This kind of outdated way of thinking.
Right, absolutely. Now, let me just see if I understood what you were saying there as far as these people that were more prone to PTSD, they had higher firing, heightened amount of adrenaline response, right? So more adrenaline than kind of the average person. And then also they were low in BDNF, right? So they weren't able to kind of get this positive neuroplastic change that BDNF provides, where it's like miracle grow for the neurons.
Yeah.
And they couldn't clear the adrenaline as well. Is that correct as well?
Exactly. You're exactly right. They also took longer to clear, which by the way, is the exact same comp gene that clears the dopamine. Right?
Okay.
So
Yeah,
that
so
same pathway. Exactly. So they're stuck in the moment for longer, and they're also recalling more information because they were in the moment for longer, right? So that total weight creates the burden of what looks like PTSD. So do they have a cognitive challenge, or are they just genetically wired for a different purpose and they were given the wrong job?
That's interesting. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
we'll see like the best coaches, the best guides, the best healers, the emotional intelligence part is they're wired that way. So when sometimes you happen to land in the right context and you unlock your superpower. So that's what we're trying to figure out. Who am I? What's the purpose? And is it serving me? What do I need to add or delete?
Right. So somebody that maybe has that high adrenaline, they have more empathy, right? Where they're actually feeling the pain of somebody that they're with versus somebody that has less of that.
Yes, exactly. And I actually do work on coaching like CEOs, for example. So we'll go into a corporation and we'll help them rebuild their C-suite, the COO, the CEO, the CFO, because they're assuming what they're good at and what they want to do, but we can actually tell them from the wiring who should be doing what job, what their capacity is. And we'll rebuild this management team, and all of a sudden they start aligning and working together, and there's no more conflict, no more friction, because they know their superpower and they know what was blocking them or leading them. We'll do this on sports teams too. I work with NHL, NBA, where like, why is there friction between players, right? Why is this guy doesn't have the clutch? He can't perform under pressure, right? Why is it that this guy doesn't listen and doesn't follow the rules? And so we'll actually teach them how their brain perceives even instructions, and it helps them do a better job as a team, and the glue comes back together, right?
Yeah, that's really good. And so some of the key genes you mentioned, the COMT gene, which helps clear out dopamine, helps clear out adrenaline. It plays a role with like estrogen metabolism. I know a number of
Yes.
things like that as well. You mentioned the DRD2, so dopamine, genetics. I'm sure you're looking at like serotonin,
Yes.
uh, probably endorphins, right? A lot of
Yes.
different things like that.
So
GABA.
serotonin, I would tell you, um, it doesn't matter who we're dealing with, whether it's a NHL hockey player or whether it's stay-at-home mom or dad. Almost everybody, we have to work on nervous system first. And most of them don't even know that, right? Most of them come saying, I have pain, I have, breast cancer, I have whatever. And when we go into their profile, we also tell them, you're also stuck in fight or flight. And the genetics of that are some people like me don't know. You're wired to push through and burn yourself out, which will crush your nervous system. And there's some people genetically that are wired to feel it viscerally, like everything is causing anxiety. So there's both sides of the scale, right? And I would tell you that if you look at general population genetics, take 10,000 people, you might find that between 5 to 10%, we don't know the exact number, but it's between 5 to 10% of people have dysregulated serotonin genes, right? So 90% are doing a good job. And I'm going to explain what that means in terms of outcome and profile, but in terms of the impact. Then, when I do a genetic masterclass, which I do often, which is like 100 people, 200 people in a room, everybody has their DNA in their hand, and I'm walking through what the genes mean, and everyone's being taught, given that the genes don't change, it's one of the few things where it's useful for a person to learn because they can always use the tool, right? So we do these classes. When I do a genetic masterclass, 200 people, most of them are struggling with something, so they're looking for an answer, right? It's like, I did everything right, why didn't it work? In that context, room full of people where people are struggling, it's usually, when I ask about the serotonin genes, around 60 to 70% will raise their hand, saying that, yeah, I had the bad version of the gene. So general population, it's 5 to 10%. Take a room full of people that are stuck with their healthcare issues, 70% will raise their hand. So why, and this is consistent, right? Because I do these classes regularly. It's consistently 60 to 70% will raise their hand. Because the nervous system being fried is locking you into an actual context called fight or flight, which is not just woo-woo. It's an actual shift in biological priorities. The energy is moved towards your immune system is shut off, your gut is suppressed, your inflammation is raised to a very high level. It's very easy to get a chronic disease. And recovery is shut off. So all the good stuff you're doing, if the terrain isn't ready, how well is it going to work? The ROI isn't there. And then you blame the thing. The stem cell didn't work, the supplements didn't work, or maybe the terrain just wasn't ready, right? So why does this all matter? Serotonin, we know of it as, and the genes involved are 5-HTTLPR, which determines the length of the receptor. So how much do you experience? How much do you bind? And then TPH, which drives the tryptophan response, which is the precursor to serotonin. So how much do I make? How much do I make and how much do I bind? That's the total story. There's also clearance, but these two are the most important, right? So we know serotonin is a mood regulating chemical. Does my mood look appropriate for whatever I just experienced? Or does it appear to be more bipolar, more up and down, right? The mechanism that drives that, and this is what's missing from the conversation, is serotonin allows your brain to prioritize information. So as we're sitting here chatting, some people are attentively listening and learning, and some people are like, what are those books behind Dr. Jockers' heads? And they're reading the titles, and some of them are like, hey, there's a door behind, why is that door up in the sky? It should be on the ground. And they just can't pay attention, right? And that's what it feels like, can't pay attention, but what really is happening, they're paying attention to more than their brain needs to pay attention to, because their brain can't prioritize. This is meant to be a superpower. Now, when your brain can prioritize and you see the world at an elevated level of detail, everything is irritating, everything is frustrating, everything is annoying, everyone is disappointing. And it creates what, if I were to give it an archetype, it's like the helicopter mom, right? The helicopter, like every little thing matters. No, the card has to be like this, and no nuts on this thing, and did everyone check mark and check themselves in, versus the other more loose mom who's like, no big deal, let's just get this done, right? So when you truly see the world at 130% of what's actually going on, and 90% of the world, or somewhere between 90 and 95% is not seeing the world that way, imagine the friction. The constant, you said it was going to happen like this, but then it happened like that. That's not what we agreed to. And they're like, it got done. Who cares? Right?
Right.
We often see, again, someone that's stuck is wired this way. And they're living in a state that we call high functioning anxiety, which is not just the anxiety of like, I don't want to get out of bed, leave me alone. It's the anxiety of like, there's a fire in my belly, need to get it done. You don't know what you're doing, give it to me. I'm going to take care of it. I'm going to fix it, right? Seeking perfection, never resting. Resting is a source of guilt, right? Waking up in the middle of the night, like, what was I supposed to be stressed out about? Oh, that. Okay, now I feel normal again, right? And then not sleeping the rest of the night. So that high functioning drive, which again was meant to be a superpower when it was engaged acutely and temporarily in some sort of calamity. The cave person, everybody had their day looks the same every day, and once in a while, bad weather, hey everybody, I see this, turn around. Once in a while, bush rustling, hey everybody, animal over there, let's go this way, and you're the first to see it. Was not meant to be engaged every day all the time, which is now the amount of stimulus we experience, right? This crushes the nervous system. It leads to cortisol addiction. It leads to like the high stress of cortisol. It feels more normal than rest and recovery. And when you bundle this up, no surprise, 60, 70% of the people that are in our programs that are stuck are wired this way, right? So work to be done, first of all, like directly addressing it. It's not difficult. And then also unwinding the habits and even just the knowledge of knowing how somebody is wired and then coming back into the room with the other people and finally seeing, oh, I get it now. They don't even see what I'm seeing. It's not about they're lazy or aloof or don't care. They're just meeting me where they're at and the volume of detail they see. So it's finding that gap, right? And knowing that this is a superpower that's not meant to be engaged all the time, only in a time of calamity, helps calm things down. But there's a lot of supplements and nutrients and vagus nerve stimulation and things that can be done also to help mitigate it all, right?
Yeah, I think that's so important. That I know the vagal nerve stimulation as well as like HRV balancing strategies and different things like that can be really helpful for those personality types and people that are struggling with that. Magnesium also. Are you seeing magnesium help a lot of these personality types?
For sure. Magnesium before sleep, even in the morning. Everybody
Yeah.
needs more.
Yeah,
That's a very,
exactly.
yeah. So for sure, we find that there's definitely the vagus nerve, like you were talking about, just stimulating it. There's devices like the Hulis, the Apollo Neuro. They're
Yeah.
great for vagal tone, right? Pulsetto. We've seen all these devices, right? Even something as simple as breath work and meditation. I would say the fastest way to rinse the inflammation of cortisol off of your cells is just meditation. It's the opposite, right? And just sitting there and disconnecting and giving your mind rest and recovery, giving it to locking yourself in a room and just breathing, right? If somebody were just sit there and for a minute, first of all, you would learn how long a minute can actually be, right? You may have forgotten. And second, what that does for your nervous systems, we just don't do it. We don't rest. And so supplement 5-HTP. 5-HTP is the fuel that gives you the tryptophan to feed into serotonin. L-theanine, GABA, calm those nerves, get your brain into sort of a more theta state as opposed to an alpha, beta, on state, right? So the good news is the solutions aren't complicated, right? They're fairly simple. It's just identifying the right problem to solve using your genes.
Yeah, it's really good. Now, how about GABA? You mentioned that obviously it's a calming neurotransmitter. Are you seeing certain genes associated with like low GABA signaling?
So not necessarily the signaling, but the need for more, especially when it comes to
Okay.
the dopamine pathway. So people that are wired like me, one of the best tools is GABA, right?
Yeah.
You'll find that you start using GABA, all of a sudden I'm sleeping. You didn't have a sleep problem, you had a fight or flight problem, you had a high cortisol problem, right? And GABA 30 minutes before sleep, and all of a sudden your brain stays in theta and isn't interrupted. When people say I can't sleep, it's not that general. It's like can't fall asleep or can't stay asleep. Those are two very different problems. Many people fall asleep, but then they wake up at 2 or 3 a.m. and the quality is not the same anymore. They get out of their deep, their body's trying to get into REM and it's just not working, right? And if you went into sleep with high cortisol and your brain's confused, the circadian rhythm still thinks it's nap time and not sleep time, right? And there's genes around that too, around circadian rhythm genetics, where we can be more precise. Then yeah, GABA is a great solution. Another very simple one, just temperature dysregulation. If somebody has dopamine issues, just getting some ice cold water on your face before going to sleep, upregulating. You don't even need a full cold plunge, just your face, your forehead, right? So like I said, the solutions are simple and elegant, just knowing what to solve.
Yeah, that's good. And so they can get the DNA 360 test, which actually maps all this out. You actually have like a whole section based on, brain and neurotransmitters.
Yeah, and I would say, I would start there, neurochemicals. Here's the process we would typically walk people. So suppose
Yeah.
there's the test, which is reporting. Then there's the classes I teach. So suppose somebody was in a class with me. The process we would go through is to first work on neurotransmitters and neurochemicals to work on the nervous system and get the terrain in a state where it's ready to repair. Then we would work on the genetics of the gut because that's another terrain consideration. It's very difficult today to not have dysbiosis, leaky gut, which is again directly connected to brain health. For every one signal the brain is sending down to the gut is sending 8 signals back, is overwhelmingly more influential to the state of your brain than the brain is to the gut, right? So the second thing we work on is gut health. There's genes that tell us, let me give you an example. So we're all familiar with glutathione, right? Glutathione is this master antioxidant the body uses to sort of clear and neutralize toxins. There are genes that tell your body how to utilize glutathione for different threats. For example, sometimes you breathe the toxin. Sometimes you put a toxin on your skin. Sometimes you eat a toxin. So there's a gene called GSTM1 that is responsible for glutathione activity in your gut. So whatever you eat, the toxins, chemicals, plastics, mold, pesticides that come along with it, the detox response, which was supposed to immediately happen right there and then, this gene GSTM1, I am missing. So when you open up my human instruction manual, it's not about a version or a variant. There's a phenomenon called a copy number variation, as opposed to like a SNP or a variant in a gene, a version of a gene. Copy number variation means, did you even get the gene? A variation in the number of copies. And for me, my answer happens to be 0. It doesn't exist for me. So this instruction to attack, neutralize, or remove toxins in the gut, for me, doesn't happen. So one of the reasons I was so sick is me and my business partner used to eat out almost daily because we were entertaining clients. And we thought we were doing a good job eating this Mediterranean food quite regularly, right? Lebanese, Mediterranean, Greek food, that type of stuff. What I didn't know was in Canada, where I live, that there's chemicals used to dry grains and then reconstitute grains because we have long winters and we need to store stuff. And those chemicals are tested as safe by the FDA and Health Canada. People seem to not react to them, but they weren't tested on my genetic profile, where I have 0 capacity to detoxify it. And so I didn't know that the eczema I had wasn't a separate skin issue. The migraines and brain fog that I had wasn't a brain issue. It was severe neural inflammation from leaky gut that led to leaky brain because I was lacking this genetic instruction. And so the second place we go is gut because, again, a systemic terrain consideration, nervous system and gut are the foundations for, is the terrain ready for the other healing? Then we get into sleep. Then we get into the detox pathways. Then we start looking at disease markers, like do we see cardiovascular issues in your future, kidney issues, and let's address those. Then we get into hormones, the genetics of hormones. And none of these are independent of each other. In as much as hormones is the last step, hormones influence the mind, right? Why do we see that 80% of dementia cases are in women? Why is it so much more in women? Because you get into menopause, there's a drop in estrogens as protective hormones, but also the estrogen metabolic pathway, it doesn't end at estrogen. You make estrogen metabolites. 2-hydroxyestrogen, 4-hydroxyestrogen, 16-hydroxyestrogen, and 2 out of 3 of those are inflammatory in nature. And some women genetically are overwhelmingly producing too much estrogen. They're estrogen dominant. We can predict it with DNA. And they're filling a bucket of one of the toxic metabolites. Now take that into menopause and the constant trickle of now my estrogens are dropped, but I'm still making the toxic version, causing inflammation to my cardiovascular tissue, my brain, etc. Then all of the things that equal bad brain health are amplified by this internal toxin, right? And so I would say here's a flow, but these are not standalone independent. They all interact, they're all redundant, right? So understanding how they overlay interact gives you a more wholesome answer.
Yeah, that's interesting. And how did you isolate the chemical to what was being sprayed on the wheat to help it have, I guess, better shelf life or be able to dry better? as opposed to maybe pesticides or herbicides that were on chickpeas in the hummus that you were eating, or anything else.
So you know what? It actually was the hummus. That's what it was.
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because
That's
chickpeas,
literally what.
people don't realize that, but chickpeas are one of the highest sprayed
Yes.
crops out there.
Yes. That's literally what it was. It was the chickpeas. So
Yeah,
I was eating hummus 3 to 4 days a week.
yeah,
My nutritionist friend told me that's one of the best things you can do, right? But my nutritionist friend wasn't not their fault. They weren't aware of the
sure.
context. So so that is what it was. So it wasn't just the drying agent, but it was all the other chemicals too, right?
Yeah,
So what this did was I learned what my priorities are.
right.
There's so many things you could focus on. Everybody can't do everything.
Yeah,
And that's another challenge. Once you go down this rabbit hole of even being on this incredible summit that you put together with all these amazing experts, right?
hmm,
There's so much wonderful information people are going to learn by participating here. Where do you start,
yeah,
right? What is the priority? So that's all I'm saying is I now know there's other systems where I'm doing really well. So for example, cellular regeneration, senescent zombie cells being
yeah.
the apoptosis of death and removal and replenishing of new cells. I do this job a little more advanced than other
Mm,
people. So I don't necessarily need to focus on the NADs and NMNs and NMRs and all the cellular health stuff because my body's doing exceptionally well there already. So how do I isolate and focus on the right stuff for me, right? That's kind of what I'm saying is like now to your point, I know my gut is detox, so I need to understand all of the additives and chemicals and all the foods and what is the threat, not just the fancy picture on the packaging, but how did it get there, right? So
mm,
that is a major priority for me. And, I literally just went straight carnivore for a few weeks
hmm.
and voila, I don't have a disease called eczema, which a doctor said I have, right? Where did it go? It was the outcome of inflammation. It was like a check engine light. My body was saying, dig deeper, something's going on, right? So this is how I would use this information, and it just helping prioritize of all this great stuff you could be doing, what's going to give you this biggest ROI. And for some of you, there's things you might be doing that you don't even need to do because your body's already doing a good job with that job.
Yeah, and so that's the great advantage of understanding this. And you're teaching courses on how people can understand their superpower. Is that right?
Yeah, in fact, I think in this context, right, just
Yeah.
because there's so much information here, um, I think we talked about hosting like a live Q&A webinar type thing, which we're going to do, right?
Hmm.
So if anyone has direct questions about their own unique circumstance or what this like ALS, Parkinson's, doesn't matter what it is, we're going to host a live webinar, live Q&A. We don't get to do this often. I love doing it because I love helping people get their answers. So we'll talk about that later. You show up and because it's very hard to just get a report and try and interpret it. I make it sound easy because I've done it 1,000 times, well, many thousands of times, right? But there is interpretation, there's nuances, which means how do we consider your context, your environment, your lifestyle, your age, all these things matter. So we'll host that Q&A just to help guide everybody.
Yeah, that's great. Now, a lot of people have heard of the MTHFR gene. That's probably the
Yeah,
most well-studied gene. Can you break that down and the importance of that and kind of understanding all the dynamics here?
yeah. So another example of talk to 5 different people and they'll tell you 5 different things about what this gene means. But it means all of those 5 things. None of them are not true. And it comes down to interpretation. What problem are you trying to solve? And how is the gene related? Not what does the gene do? We look at it the wrong way. It's not
Yeah.
prescriptive. It should be a tool to go back to, right? So first of all, MTHFR is the central starring character of a system called methylation. And where we get things wrong, remember, most of our genetic research comes from pharma research, which the intention is let me isolate a gene so I can make a drug. That's the path, right? When really it should be the opposite. Let me combine all these genes to see more of like a chain and how does this link influence the rest of the chain as opposed to just a link, right? That's the pharma way of thinking. We want to be more functional. So if you look at MTHFR, it is surrounded by other genes called SHMT1, FUT2, MTR, MTR. There's all these other genes that kind of like baton pass. Job gets done by a gene, gets passed on to the next gene, and that gene adds and contributes more work, and it keeps going down the path. And now the job is fully done. So if you only look at one job, you don't really understand the full flow, right? So now what is methylation in simple terms? I would say the easiest way to describe it is anti-inflammatory response. It's the thing you're relying on to shut the fire of inflammation off, which is why it's tied to things like autism and neural inflammation and women's health issues, because whatever else is going on, the inflammatory outcome might linger and this burden becomes bigger because of lack of methylation. But it does three other things. It is also a system of conversion. So if you eat a banana and you think you're getting some potassium or some beta carotene from your carrots, how did that actually get into your cell? They need to be converted into bioavailable forms, and that is a process of methylation. So they get methylated and turned into something your body can use. It is also a clearance conversion. So things like metals and plastics that are not so water soluble, your detox pathway is assuming that it can make things water soluble so that you can pee them out and sweat them out and poop them out. But we now live in a reality with which our body didn't know we're going to have to deal with heavy metals and plastics and other toxins that we weren't supposed to, right? And so there's some things that are harder to remove, and they need to also get methylated, broken down, converted so that it can be removed. So that's another, this is also why it's tied to things like autism, because of the heavy metal injury to the brain from things like vaccinations, for example, right? The third thing that it does, and this is perhaps the biggest thing, that is the biggest impact, that is also the least spoken of thing. Methylation is the regulation of gene expression. So you walk into a room and the context change. Suppose you smell some chemicals. Your detox gene should start working better temporarily. Suppose you eat a meal. Your metabolic gene should turn on. Right? So your body is supposed to turn up and down the volume of these genes to give you exactly what you need in the moment for what you're experiencing. So your body will shift priorities. That is a question of gene expression. Temporarily turn on the volume because I'm doing something and I need more of something. Methylation is what turns the dials of the volume. So if you're not methylating well, the time it takes you to adapt is longer. And so the negative outcome of the things that are bad for you are more exponentially worse, right? And so some people that don't methylate well are more sensitive, they take longer to recover, they smell a chemical and don't feel so good, they go golfing and breathe these pesticides and the next day they're exhausted because the things they needed to cope didn't turn on in time, right? So this is a very important system. And you can't name another system from hormones to neurochemicals to metabolism that doesn't touch. It affects everything, right? So when we talk about MTHFR as this isolated singular gene, that is such an oversimplified way to look at it, but also the research and information we have came from the desire to oversimplify to make a pill, right?
Yeah.
Instead of empowering us with the full picture, which is so easy to do. I know I make it sound like it's a lot, but learn it once and you'll see it's actually quite simple.
Yeah, it's a really good breakdown. And yeah, a lot of people have talked about MTHFR. And, here's the great thing is, all of us have DNA SNPs that are, different variants that are not the highest form of that particular enzyme. But we were all built to have a certain superpower, right? And that's kind of what you like to explain. It's just really about knowing your unique biochemistry, right? And understanding that and understanding kind of where your strengths and weaknesses, right? And then being able to kind of balance out weaknesses and magnify strengths.
If something arrives in my house on Amazon, I read the instruction manual. A microwave, right? I'll read the instruction manual before I turn it on. Something as complex as the human body, we don't even bother reading the instruction manual to understand how it's wired. This is why not only genetics, but functional testing in general, gut microbiome, neurochemicals, toxin testing, Dutch test, hormone testing, like where are you at? Right. And what you've put here together today and learning how the body actually works with all these experts, and the knowledge will guide you and direct you. You don't need to wait for something to break and then call the doctor and say, please fix it. Right. You can, with information, empower and prevent. You can understand you can read the instruction manuals and understand how your body works and know what the right problem to solve is, as opposed to this free-for-all, listen to a new podcast every week and just do everything. And some of those things might even hurt you. And I can actually talk about the genetics of the thing that absolutely we believe to be true is good can actually hurt somebody, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, last question, like what are the top, let's say 3 to 5 things that you see kind of across the board benefit pretty much all genetic types, like as far as lifestyle things?
Uh, so if we're going through like a class of a bunch of people, the one thing that comes up for everybody is EMF mitigation. Doesn't matter where you're at your genetics. We are inundated. It's ubiquitous. It's everywhere. And if you don't have like can't sleep at night, sore, can't detoxify, can't recover, yeah, you're also bombarded with EMF all the time, right? So
Right.
that's one area where we tell people doesn't matter what your genetics are. You need a plan to mitigate, to neutralize, turning the Wi-Fi off, some EMF mitigating device of sorts, right? The other area where we say everybody has to just do the job is your toxic burden. You know, today your indoor air quality is 5 times worse the outdoor air
Hmm.
quality pollution, right? And I'm sure it's going to come up in all these great conversations you're having how that affects the brain. You know, it's said that it's one of the leading drivers of Alzheimer's today is inhalation, just inhalation of toxins that are causing neural inflammation that we don't even see or feel or taste. It's just happening, right? So purging your environment of everything that is an endocrine disruptor, everything that is a fragrance, everything that is synthetic, because think about not the one simple thing, but the total accumulation of all of it. That's the burden. So your toxic burden. Um, I would say the third thing is the single greatest contributor to the expression of negative disease causing genes is negative emotion. Stress, anxiety, trauma, negative thoughts, toxic people is the number one way to turn on a gene that causes cancer, causes the disease, right? The number one way to shut them off and engage longevity genes is positive emotion. And I'm pointing this out because culturally, rest, recovery, joy, pleasure, love to us is like a source of guilt. It's like, I need to be on, I need to be working, I need to be active, I should not be laughing and joking. That is like, I'm wasting time, right? It is therapy, it is necessary. You can't make your hormones. Oxytocin is the love hormone is a baseline hormone for everything else, right? So if you've lost the way of how humans are supposed to live, and if you don't have pleasure, joy, love as a daily dose of therapy, it'll make you sick,
Mm.
right? And I don't need to look at your genes to tell you that this is true for everybody. Now, having said that, do these things if you now laid out a context where everything else you're going to do is going to work really well, right? Because now the terrain is not blocking you from the benefit of everything else.
Yeah, it's a great rundown right there. So gratitude and like you said, laughter. I mean, laughter is our greatest medicine. So make sure we're engaging in things like that. It's a really, really great rundown as far as that goes. Now, do you see any of these genes impact like the kinds of foods that you should eat? For
Yeah,
example, are you seeing certain genetics that would say that this person would do better on a more carnivorous type diet, low fiber, right, lower fiber diet versus somebody that may do better on a higher fiber diet?
definitely. I would tell you that any sort of elimination diet, someone's going to feel good in the first few weeks,
Yeah.
right?
If you
But
eliminate ultra processed food and toxins, yeah,
exactly.
for sure.
Yeah. Right. You keep it clean, you're going to feel good. Now, the sustainability of that choice is what matters, right?
Yeah.
Is it something that is a twice a year reset, or is it a permanent choice? So the genetics of fat metabolism, the actual enzymes you need to be a carnivore or a keto, for example, it is variable. So some people cannot sustain keto for a long time. They have to take a break. The thing that we think that sugar causes diabetes, in some people genetically, there's a phenomenon called epistasis where fat will cause diabetes, the opposite of what we believe, right? We actually tell some people your metabolic dysfunction is more from fat than sugar. So that's one. The enzymes for starch. There's some people, I was doing some work with the US female Olympic team, right? This is a few years ago. And their question was, why is it that at training time, these particular 4 or 5 girls out of the 100 do really, really well, but when it comes to competition, they do horrible. And they thought it was up here, neurochemical, stress, clutch, right? And when I looked at their neurochemicals and stress, there wasn't a problem there. So I dug deeper and I found that all of those girls that they pointed their finger at were really, really good at metabolizing starch and carbohydrates and turning them into fuel. And the TCF7L2 gene that drives the insulin response was also incredible. So they were kind of wired to thrive off carbs. When they went from practice to competition, They went from their local private decision making to a team that made the meal plan for everyone and put everyone on this low carb cutting meal plan. And it was literally the lack of carbs that made them fall apart. So this thing that we think universal global statement, low carb, doesn't work for some people, right? But then there are some people that that's the exact thing they need to do to prevent Alzheimer's and prevent dementia, because like they are metabolically a disaster if they were to go up a tiny amount of carbs, right? So plant-based, how many people that start eating vegan a year later, hormones dysregulated, mood is off, muscle is falling off their body, everything is falling apart, but they don't blame the vegan diet because as an elimination diet, it felt so good in the first 2 weeks, right?
Yeah.
There are specific enzymes for how you break down plant proteins and the ability to actually get the building blocks and the amino acids out of them. Some people don't do a good job there. There's specific enzymes for how you break down leafy greens, kale, spinach, broccoli, cruciferous plants, and some people don't do good there. And some of those foods are oxalate rich, will break your gut down. This is why you have that argument over do oxalates matter or not, because some people genetically plow through those foods really well and don't have the exposure. And some people can't break those foods down, so the oxalate exposure is much greater and will hurt them, right? So yeah, if you give me your DNA, I'll say, here's your meal plan, right? And it's genetically designed based on whatever your ancestors did, you're going to eat that way.
Yeah, so really interesting. So certain genes are going to impact that. You know, I always tell people there's like it's like a fiber bell curve, right? There's some people on the far right that do well on a very, very high fiber diet, and they tend to be the ones that are always telling everybody you should all be on a plant-based diet. And then there's people that do very poorly on fiber, and they need more of a very low fiber, if not like a full carnivore diet. And they're often telling everybody they need to be on that diet. But most of us are somewhere in the middle there of that bell curve, right? And kind of figuring out like where your fiber threshold is for that, where you feel good, where your gut feels good, you move your bowels well, you have, you know, less gas, bloating, reflux, different issues like that, kind of figuring that out, optimizing your protein to start, figuring out your fiber threshold, and then kind of filling in the gaps with some healthy fats up to your threshold as well. Because like you mentioned, there's a lot of people that they can't handle a lot of calories in a meal. Yeah. There's other people that can handle high amounts of calories, high amounts of fat. Like I can easily eat 1,500 calories, you know, if not 2,000 calories in a meal and feel great. My wife, on the other hand, 500-600 calories is about it. You know, 800 calories maybe at the max, right? And that's good for her in a meal.
You literally described me to a T, and it's just part of my solution, which was I used to, like I said, Mediterranean diet. I was eating a lot of salads, a lot of raw plants, and I could not tolerate the fiber. I could not tolerate the plants. And like you said, I had reflux. Yeah. I had a horrible reflux issue, bloating and gassy, brain fog all the time, right? Pain, inflammation, because when you do it every day over time, the accumulation is going to hurt you, right? And I could not sustain the training I was doing and what my trainer was telling me to eat in terms of calorie volume. Like I also couldn't tolerate that. So I'm literally the opposite of you. I'm your wife, right? So that one change in terms of diet completely resolved so many things. But you're right that many people are somewhere in the middle. And where this matters the most is for the person that's stuck. It's like nothing works, right? When nothing works, you're probably on some extreme genetically, which is the middle is not the right answer. And that's the person that actually needs the most help. Like me, I needed the most help. I was stuck. The middle does not work for me.
Right. Yep. Yeah. And that's where you got to figure out the right diet for you. You got to personalize your diet. So that's key there. And that's really the best diet, is a personalized diet. And ultimately the best supplement plan, the best lifestyle plan is a personalized plan. And that's, you know, what you're helping people with. And people can find out more information on your website as well. It's Kashif Khan. His last name spelled Khan official.com. So KashifKhanofficial.com. When people go to your website, what should they look at first?
There's my website. So remember, I do private coaching. I have a lot of sort of VIP clients, and then we do groups, right? And so there isn't, I would say my Instagram account, which is the exact same thing, Kashif Khan Official, it's the same. I would go to my Instagram account because there's a lot of knowledge to share there in terms of everything from toxins to food to, you know, everything you want to know. Given that this group, I think, is seeking more, we're going to host a webinar for them, right? And between however this happens, they'll be informed on how to do that. Live Q&A. So we don't do this often, but given whoever's here, for you guys only. This is not for the outside world. It's literally for whoever's in this summit. We're going to host a live Q&A. I would say come to that, and then we can drill into your personal stuff, and you don't need to feel stuck.
Yep, sounds good. So we'll be sending out more information as far as that goes. But in the meantime, check out Kashif Khan on Instagram as well, so you can get a lot of great information there. And Kashif, any last words of inspiration here for our audience?
Yeah, I would say that I did not believe this until I did the work. Remember, I didn't come from the healthcare industry or wellness industry. I stumbled upon it to heal myself. And then it was so empowering. I kind of found a sense of purpose, so I just kept going, right? So what I've learned is that chronic disease and the pace at which you age is optional. It's a choice. I didn't know that. I thought that it's like, just like everybody, it's a thing that comes with aging. It's like cardiovascular disease is in my family. It's not true, right? The things that my dad had when he was my age, I just watched him sick I only knew my dad as being sick growing up, right? I don't have any of those things. In fact, I'm healthier now at 46 than I was in my 20s. So I just tell you that if you use all this information in this incredible summit, listen to all the experts, you should be able to have a plan for like how to make chronic disease optional, how to make your brain's power and strength and longevity optional. Why do I say optional? You have to do the work, right? As long as you choose this path and do the work, it is an option. If you don't do the work, then you may end up like everybody else, which is like susceptible to whatever you expose yourself to. So learn, do the work, and the pace at which you age is truly optional.
Beautiful. That's right. So there you go. All right. Thanks so much, Kashif. And everybody, will see you on a future interview, and everybody be blessed.